So let's get into the order of operations for a paver patio project. And basically the first thing that needs to be done, and this is after you initially meet with the client, you send them a proposal or an estimate or a quote, then they accept it, and then you go to meet with them to have them sign your contract, you receive a deposit payment. Then basically when you are leaving the job site or leaving the client's property and you're on your way home or to your office or wherever it is that you're going next, you will then call in locates immediately or use their application if they have one on their phone, or use their online service if it's on just on a website, whatever it is that you need to do to get access to have them come out and send out a utility locating service to have that done. That way it can be done long before the job even starts. So usually it takes a couple days for them to get out there, and it's just very, very crucial, especially if you're doing any digging or excavation work with any heavy equipment. Locates need to be done no matter what. It's just stupid to not have locates done, plain and simple. I know some companies that have done that and then they just try to do guesswork, and it's dumb. It's 100% for free in most areas. I've never heard of it ever being, I've never heard of anyone having to pay to have locates done. So bottom line, just get that done immediately. Then when you go to the job site the first time, of course, you're going to go in, write down your arrival time when you get there in your work log, whether it's electronic or paper, and then map out the work area with white marking paint. White is the only color that's not used by the utility companies for marking their lines and pipes and all that sort of stuff. Usually it's water that's going to be blue, yellow is gas, red is electric, and orange is cable or phone. So white is usually not used, but you just have to you'll have to check with the company that does the service. The big thing with using paint is it makes the crew's job a lot easier. And of course, when you're doing this, you want to be using tape, so that way you know exactly the dimensions, especially when it comes to patios and retaining walls. So if you are marking out a circular patio, one person should hold the end of the tape measure, as you can see right here at the very center of the patio. And then while the other uses the tape measure and they walk along the edge at the appropriate distance of the circular area with marking paint, and then they just spray out a line. The next thing that you want to do, and this is after the base has already been installed and prepped, but you'll want to lay the soldier course pavers accordingly with the outside of the soldiers touching the paint. But one thing that you will need to do is you got to know some basic math when it comes to the excavation process. You need to be able to figure out how deep you need to be for your patio. In most areas, depending on the exact soil type, again, check with your local supplier. You may need more base, you may need less, probably not less, but most likely more if in any case. But you'll need about 4 to 6 inches of base material, which is going to be your class 5 gravel, or your class 2, class 1, 3, whatever it is. And if you're doing a driveway, you're going to need about 12 to 18 or more inches of base material. Then an inch of sand, which is going to be just your washed sand, usually like playground sand is another word for it. And then your pavers, which are going to be about 2 3/8 inches to 2 3/4 inches thick. So basically what we did was 6 inches of base material, inch of sand, pavers that are 2 3/8 inch thick. So the total depth of excavation is 9 3/8 inches, and you need to have that throughout the whole pit. So then when you begin the excavation process using your skid loader, or if you're doing it with shovels, dig out your areas and load the soil and other debris into your dump truck, your dump trailer, haul it to your local yard waste site, or if you have your own property or your shop where you can dump it at, haul it there and store it, and you can use it as fill for another project. You want to dig out about a 3, 4, 5 inches wider than your patio will be, so that way the snap edging has a place to go and hold the patio in place. That way the spikes will be pounded into some super compact base material rather than just the native soil, which is usually pretty compact, but that base material adds a little bit more security to it. And if you are constructing a patio on a property that already has turf, you'll need to use sheets of plywood to cover the turf when driving over it with a skid to reduce the potential for damage. Or if you want to factor it in and you can be really, really smooth with your operating of the equipment, you take the exact same tracks and then just do black dirt and seed or black dirt and sod. At the end of the project, just make sure you factor in the time and the money for the material and labor. And if there are any utility lines in your dig sites, you need to absolutely hand dig in those areas and be very, very careful not to damage the lines, because you could get hurt or die, especially if it's electric. And if you hit it and it was marked, you're going to be required to pay the repairs, and that stuff's not cheap. Now, when it comes to base prep, once the excavation site is all dug out, compact the sub base, which is basically the bottom of your excavation pit, with a plate compactor. Go over the area at least twice to make sure it's totally compacted. Then begin to haul in and spread the class 5, compact the area at every 2-inch increment of the total depth of the base material. So if we're running with 6 inches of base material, we're going to be compacting the whole area 3 times. And if you can, wet down the gravel. And some compactors will even have a watering ability within the machine where it'll just trickle out water as you're going, which is pretty cool, and it allows for super dense compaction. And then either using your laser level or a 4-foot level, depending on how big the project is, to measure a proper slope, which is 1/8 to 1/4 inch per 1 foot of length of the patio, to ensure water will run off the patio and then away from structures like the garage or the house or any building where water should not be going towards. So as you can see, the base prep is in action right here in both of these images. What it's going to look like is relatively loose, and then you run the compactor over it and it basically looks like a flat roadway, and that's what we want it to look like. The more compact it is, the better, because that means the less chance that the patio could move with freezing or thawing temperatures, especially in the cooler regions where that occurs. So once you have the ample depth of class 5 on the patio area and it's all compacted out at a proper slope, you need to make sure that you have screed rails, which you can pick up at Home Depot, and they can be simple PVC pipes that are just 1 inch in size. And basically what you're going to do is place those rails on the top of a section of class 5 about 4 feet apart, maybe even a little bit less, and then begin to haul in the sand. And you can also add a layer of landscape fabric at this point in time between the sand and the gravel to prevent water from running through and then insects from getting through and all that sort of stuff. But basically what you're going to do is, using a 2x4 by 8 foot long piece of lumber, place a board atop of the rails kind of here as you see in the image, and pull back the sand, and this will allow the sand to be at an even depth and perfect slope, as the rails should be on top of the gravel surface. And so then once the entire patio area has been screeded out, which basically is what this will look like right here, except on a more grand scale, of course, begin laying your soldier course, which is your row of pavers laid throughout the entire border of a patio. It gives an extremely professional look, and it just makes it look amazing. And use a string line to do this, so that way you know that the soldier course is totally straight. So then once the soldier course is complete to an extent, and obviously if you can't reach an area because that part of the patio is backed into a corner or something like that, just work your way to it and do the best that you can. But then begin to lay the pavers in the pattern that you're using, and the guides to your pattern are usually going to be available from the manufacturer on their website or in brochures that your supplier has, or maybe even when you purchase it includes instructions. And here's an example of what that string line would look like with a soldier course laid out here, and another example here with beginning to lay out the patio. As you can see, the soldier course is over here on the edge, and you'll notice with the screed rails with the little bit of a slot here, what we would basically do is take a couple shovelfuls of sand and then just throw it out there, and then we'd use a trowel to smooth that out and make sure it's all filled in and there's no gap or anything like that. Because if you left that right here, the pavers along this line over time could just sink a little bit, and that's not going to look very good. So make sure that hole gets filled in. And then what you do is you keep laying pavers until you reach the end of the patio, and you need to make cuts similar to this picture right here where you see these big gaps. And the reason for this is because there was a different pattern used here on this walkway versus the wide open patio, and this was the landing to some stairs off a deck. So basically you have to cut pieces to fit into these slots. And so what you're going to be doing is taking a paver that'll fit the space of where the cut paver needs to go and place it over the top of the edge paver, and use a paver marking pencil if you have one. Otherwise, if you really have to, you can use a rock or something, but you want to use a paver marking pencil, or you can even use like a liquid marker. However, those are basically permanent and the color cannot go away. So if you happen to mark the wrong side, you're going to have that marking on there, and it's going to be on there for quite some time. So what you're going to do is basically use the trowel as a ruler to mark a straight line, and you'll see the images here on the next slide. But you're going to want to place an X on the piece that's not needed. So as we're going along the edge right here on this particular paver, you just draw a line just like this. These are obviously different pavers, but you make sure that you have your line straight as an arrow and write an X on the piece that's not needed. And also when you cut a corner off, just set it aside, set all your straps aside, because you never know when you could be needing to use these pieces later on in the project. Because again, we're basically just putting together a big puzzle. Next, you're going to cut the piece to fit with a concrete saw, just like here in the image. and repeat until all the cuts have been made. This is usually one of the most time-consuming parts of the project because it just takes a long time, takes a lot of effort. If it's hot out, it's going to be absolutely brutal to do this, but that's just kind of how it is. Just got to push through it and get it done. And ideally what you want to do is have one person on the crew to just be the guy that cuts pavers, and whoever's the best at it is the one that's going to do it. And then have another person mark the cuts for them, and then just be delivering them the pavers that need to be cut. And when the person that's cutting is done with that piece, they can just set it aside, so that way the guy that's running pavers can bring it over to the guys that are laying them, and that will really increase your efficiency. And when you are doing all your cuts, leave the saw running at idle between cutting, as this will allow the air-cooled engine to cool off, because when you're cutting, it's running at wide open throttle. The engine gets really hot. You just want to let it idle and just keep going, and it's really hard to usually try to start back up an engine that's been running hot and wide open if you are killing it every 2 minutes. But so now, once all the cuts have been made, align the snap edging along the edge of the patio and nail in the snap edging spikes, usually about a foot or maybe 9 inches long, into the ground to secure the edging. You'll need this about every 3 feet, depending on how many curves and edges and corners and stuff there are. Obviously, with this here in the image, there's a spike here, and there's going to be a spike there, another one. It just really depends, and also the soil type as well. Sometimes you might need more, but this should be done before the joint sand is being swept into the joints, as it helps hold in the sand as well. And then if your patio has any curves, depending on the type of snap edging that you're using, you may need to cut the snap edging frame pieces in order to stretch it around the curve. It's not necessarily pictured, but what you're going to do is, if you notice here on the cursor, some brands of snap edging will have a piece here, and then they'll have a piece here, and what you'll have to do is just basically cut in the middle of this, so that way this is a little bit more flexible, and it makes things a lot easier when you are installing the snap edging. And so once all those spikes are nailed in, the patio is basically totally secure. Then you begin compacting. Usually if you have bigger pavers like 12 by 12 or anything bigger, use a sheet of plywood to absorb some of the vibration to avoid breaking any of the pavers. Chances are it's going to happen no matter what. You're going to break 1 or 2 pavers on every single job, especially if you're using 9 by 9s or anything bigger than that. So make sure you have a little bit extra pavers in the event of that happening. And also wear ear protection, because this is going to be insanely loud. If you ever ran a compactor over top of any form of pavement, you know that they're very loud. And also, all these white spots that you'll see here on the image, these are basically pavers with efflorescence on them, and something that occurs within the manufacturing process. So if you notice some of your pavers have that, it's something that just happens to all the pavers, and eventually it wears off. You can also get cleaner for it if you so choose to do that, or if your client wants that cleaned off. For whatever the case may be, if you want to get rid of it, you can clean that off, but make sure they know ahead of time that during the curing process, this stuff kind of occurs, and it can happen to any paver, any brand, any style. So make sure that they are aware of that. So then, once everything's been compacted, you'll be opening up your bags of polymeric sand. Usually each 50-pound bag will cover about 50 to 60 square feet, depending on the joint size, the paver height, etc. And basically just dump the sand into piles and take a big push broom, sweep it into all the joints across the entire patio, just like you can see here. Just sweep it all in, and eventually work your way to the very edge of the patio until you move everything off the patio. So then, once you get the polymeric sand taken off, once all the polymeric sand has been swept into the joints, fire up a backpack blower but blow off the entire patio on idle. Doesn't need to be wide open or anything like that, just idle, so that way it gets it off of the surface, because when we wet it down, it's going to totally bond with the pavers, and you don't want to have that because it's really unsightly. So after the polymeric sand has been blown off, wet it down with a hose using a nozzle that has a mist setting. Do not use a jet or just the hose with water coming out, and it's just going to splash the polymeric sand everywhere and make an absolute mess, and you're going to have to either be scraping polymeric sand off once it dries, or you don't want to do it. It's going to be an absolute mess. So make sure it's misting, and that's it. Then allow the patio to dry for 15 to 20 minutes, or maybe even longer depending on how humid it is. You just want all the pavers to be dry, and then reapply the water again, and then the patio is complete. And then stay off it for at least 24 hours. And if it's a driveway, 48 to 72 hours. So here are some examples of a paver patio and the whole process of how things go. So basically here is a before picture of a little bit of a landing patio here with just a very small concrete area. And then at one point there was a tree here which had been stump ground, but then we actually were digging and found even more of the stump from, I believe it was the previous homeowner or something like that. And the customer had to pay extra because there was no way we could have known this was here. And that's one thing that you need to make sure is in your contract or in your proposal, whatever the document is that your clients are signing, is that if there are uncovered things that are found during the excavation process that have to be removed, they're super expensive. So say it's like some timbers or something, like anything that can't just be taken to a regular yardway site, or it's a massive stump like this, because this was a 100-year-old tree and it had to be stump ground. So we had to hire a company to come in, stump grind it. We had to pay them, and we had to add the bill to the customer's bill. And does it suck? Yes, but that's just the nature of things, and that's just kind of how it goes with landscaping. So here is the process. We showed this picture earlier, but here's the paver laying process. And then here is the finished product. This is the day after the polymeric sand had been applied and wet down. So start to finish, from nasty to much better, with a heck of a lot of effort in between. And so here are a couple other images of completed patios. This here actually has a stain on it, so it looks like it's wet all the time, but now it's not. And then this project here is just freshly wet down with a sitting wall in the background. So you can see really the possibilities are pretty much endless when it comes to pavers. And then here's another image right here with the walkway. This was if you remember the very first picture with the white paint all over, that was this project right here, with a walkway and then the open space patio. And then a couple more. This is when they are dried. And here's the one from the previous slide that's all dried with furniture on it. And then here's another image